Am I supposed to sit?
What?
Where am I supposed to sit?
Wherever.
Okay.
Family, okay, yeah.
Family of Dan?
No,
Yeah.
maybe I just want on the side.
Who's sitting on the
Aaron,
side?
you're sitting next.
You're sitting on my side. And then, so, well,
Oh, Debbie?
You sit right
Where are Debbie and I?
here. Here.
Tasha was there. Wait for Cody. You want Deborah up here too?
Deb will sit next to me.
Okay.
Where am I
Right
going to
here.
sit? Oh, great.
Cody's getting shorts on. Oh, I hope that doesn't fall over. Oh, Dad fell down.
Here. He's letting us know he's here.
That's a lot of beer. Evan, are you good?
Yeah.
He's 6 sheets to the wind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It looks like it's
6 sheets to the wind.
Let's have folks kind of stand more in the middle rather.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We'll be all right. All right. So before we get started, oh, Cody, where's Cody?
Cody's putting shorts on.
Oh, I mean, that'd be a first for Cody. So.
Yeah, well, wait,
Yeah.
you haven't done it.
Yeah.
He's changing his.
Oh. It's all right, Pops. Don't worry. You'll be all right.
Get him to hold it. Is that gonna work or not?
He's gonna make a friend in me.
Yes, yeah, it's.
Those flowers look beautiful right there.
Yeah, I can kind of keep it.
Okay.
Okay, now Aaron's gone.
I know. No. Crumbs. Can't expect them to be on time
No,
ever.
they never are on.
Yeah. Right, Beardsley time. Yeah, there happens to be one in this crowd that I am very surprised they made it on time. Michael Beardsley. Yeah. Yeah.
Mike knows who you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. 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 And in the Middle East they call it inshallah time. Yeah. Inshallah it will happen. You know. Yeah. So yeah, that was Beardsley time.
I don't know what happened.
Show them what they're
Yeah, really did. Yeah, Aaron's now gone. Here comes Cody. Yay!
Hey.
Much better, Cody. You look a little more comfortable.
All right. All right, are we ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's get this show on the road. Before we start, I want to thank Evan and Tucson Media Studio for the hard work they put in. You know, this wouldn't be possible without their assistance. We'd be really having a tough time trying to figure it out without them. So, you know, big help there, and we'll give you a round of applause later. But yeah, just this will be very informal. I'll have a few words to say. Obviously, we have some Zoom presenters, and we'll start it off. I'll say prayer. We'll have a moment of silence, and then I will say a few remarks, and then anybody is welcome to come up who wishes to. We're going to have one person local first, and then Agu will go, and then another person local, and then the McNairs will go. And if the reps make it on, then we'll intersperse them. But yeah, it's going to be, yeah, you get to fight each other on the way up. So if somebody comes up, it's a quick round of you know, Cowie Bowie Bow. Right? But yeah, just very informal. You know, just very thankful that everybody's here, and yeah, here to remember Dad. And obviously, this doll is not quite correct because I think I only saw Dad wear a parka once, and there was a Hawaiian shirt underneath it. You know, but yeah, just here to remember a great man. So Without further ado, we'll get started with a brief prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we gather here together to remember our friend and father, Daniel Beardsley. Be with us, Lord, as we express our love, that your will may be evident both in his passing and in this gathering. Let us love one another and support each other as we walk through the memories. Let you be glorified, Father, and may we find joy and closure with these moments. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just have a moment of silence. Thank you again to everybody who is here. Without further ado, all right, let's see if I can find where I started. All right. Did we?
Oh, there he is.
He's back. No worries.
There
All right.
he is. Havana.
It's truly wonderful and humbling to see so many here, especially those in shorts. Number one, because it's Arizona and you should never be wearing pants on Memorial Day in Arizona. Number two, Dad loved shorts. He loved cut-off jean shorts.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Shorts so old you could see pockets peeking from the bottom, and more of the whitest chicken legs you have ever seen or ever would want to see. And that was my dad, Daniel Beardsley, in his own way always giving more than you asked for. He held a plethora of titles: son, brother, husband, uncle, father, and grandfather. He was a student, a surveyor, a lawyer, a negotiator, a listener, a coach, a leader, an educator, and a mentor. Mostly, he was a friend. Dad endeavored to befriend everyone he met. At one point, when we were having a frank discussion, he mentioned to me that he never really positioned himself in life to have a best friend. He had a lot of great friends, but he moved, his circumstances moved his friends away from him, and so the ability to build a relationship with a best friend was not something that he was gifted with. So he found opportunities to make everybody his best friend. He observed to me that he had not positioned himself in life to have a best friend, but that he had many great friends, and yet never once in my life have I met an acquaintance of my father who would not give the shirt off their back for my dad. In truth, all were his best friend, all were beloved of him and by him, and all were willing to give their shirts because he had done so first, willingly and gladly. Those who considered my father a friend know he took great pride in watching others grow. Even unto his children, he was first and foremost always an educator, a teacher, a mentor, and a guide. He took such joy in seeing those he taught blossom and grow to surpass his own achievements or branch into areas he would never have considered. Everyone here has stood on the shoulders of a giant. I would like to take us now to Scripture. And there are many parts of the Scripture that speak of great and holy men, of eternal salvation through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the emulation of his life. Today I wish to speak to you of what the Bible tells us of education, of seeking to better know the Lord, of becoming wise and knowledgeable through study and learning of him Almighty. First Proverbs speaks to learning of God. Verse 2 through 9 begins, "To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a graceful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck. These words describe those who pursue knowledge, a purpose my father mirrored all of his life. Knowledge was always foremost in his mind." Proverbs 16:16 continues, "How much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen above silver." My dad was a man to put knowledge and experience as something always to be strived for, a priority and a path. When I heard about the donations to the IRWA Education Fund in his name, I knew that he had imparted that same love of learning in all those he had impacted. We now carry his legacy to others. We follow in his path. As Dad was fond of telling Aaron, Agu, and I, the apple doesn't fart far from the tree. And his was truly a great tree, and I would not wish to be far from it in any case. If Dad were here today, he would sit among us with his silly grin, enjoy a sip of wine, tell a joke, engage in a discussion, and fill the place with his gracious love and learning. Let us remember him today for his greatness and every little thing he did for us. Though they are too numerous to count, every deed is worth sharing. Please come forth and tell of this life of incredible meaning. I thank you. Whoever so wishes may get up.
So is Audrey trying to say something?
No, someone local first.
Someone local first. Sharon. Yeah, Sharon.
Well, I didn't intend to start because I thought people would be saying a lot of great things about what a fabulous person Dan was and all of his accomplishments. We all know that. So I thought I would share something that some of you may not know. Dan and I had a very special relationship. The Beardsleys opened their home and opened their heart to my family many times, and we actually live with them from time to time in Alaska for various reasons. Dan and I developed sort of a rapport to the point where I thought it was appropriate to designate him as husband number 2. And Mary Ellen was fine with that because my husband did all of the honeydew chores in the house that Dan didn't get around to. So it worked out, nice trade. Well, husband number 2 was many years ago. It started many years ago. Later on, we moved to the South, and I was introduced to social media, but it was a very weak introduction, so I thought, LinkedIn, I'll try that. I sign up for it, and it tells you can invite people. And when you invite people, the people who respond have to answer questions. So I invited Dan. And a few days later, I looked at LinkedIn to see if I was making any progress, and there it was, Dan Beardsley, occupation, husband number 2. Another little thing about Dan that some of you may know, because when he was at work, he was hardcore. But in his real life, he was known to procrastinate. So I gave up LinkedIn, but I looked at it the other day to see if he had ever dealt with that listing, because I let him know. I said, you are now publicly husband number 2 to the world. I looked at it, and it still says Dan Beardsley, second husband at Dryden and LaRue. That's our Dan. And for me, there will never be a husband number 2 like Dan.
All right, first it's going to be Agu.
I don't know if he knows that.
Agu, can you hear me?
Yeah, Sean, I can hear you. I'm next?
Yep. You're next.
Okay.
Dan Beardsley, a second husband at Dryden and LaRue.
Agu, make sure to turn off the live stream on YouTube.
Come on. Okay. ¿Por qué sale la mano? Ah, está tarde. Hi everybody, my name is Agustin. I'm from Argentina, and I was an exchange student for 1 year. And I got to meet this awesome family. Sorry, I take a delay to start talking, but there is like a minute between what I'm talking and the YouTube conversation. Well, first time I met Daniel Beardsley, I get amazed how a great people he was, and I admire of him a couple things. First, his empathy. He was a person who all the time was with me in the good times and in the bad times. Also, he was a great advisor, not only when I was an exchange student, that I was a kid, but also when I needed, because he came to Argentina a lot of times, and I met him. I joined him in the United States in different times, and he gave me excellent advice. Also, he has a great sense of humor. All of you probably realize that already. And he was very optimistic. He was happy, and it was very great how he made all the ordinary things very extraordinary things. And I remember a couple stories. The first one was when the first day I get to Alaska, I didn't have any English, and he didn't understand any Spanish, and he made a great effort to make me feel at home, and also I could understand him and he understand me, and it was because he had to talk to express what he wants or to understand me. And also I remember the three things he used to say he loved at most, and it was skiing, fishing, and travel, and make trips. And I enjoy every time I stay with him, and also with Sean and Mom. And I'm very sad I cannot be there. I would really love to live closer. But I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to remember him, that he was a great dad, amazing. And what else? I have a lot of stories that I don't know. All can I remember is he was with me all the time, even when we stay far away. Thank you, Sean, for this moment.
Another local person? Where's Doug? Yeah, I'm calling Doug. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
It's only fair.
It's only fair. Where do I start? 1971. Dan and I met Curry's Corner. We were pumping gas and washing windshields, which was not the easiest thing at 40 below. Yeah. And then Dan's mom lived around the corner. He was staying with her at first up in a trailer court. He bought a trailer. I ended up renting a room from him, which we spent a lot of nights not getting in till the wee hours. I had to open Curry's at 6 in the morning and the bars closed at 5. So that was an escapade. Where'd we go from there? College. We both ended up going up to U of A. Dan was there for a year. I ended up in a dorm room. There's a lot of nights Dan spent on the floor in my dorm room because it was too far to drive home after some nights out. We had an 8 o'clock survey class. And then Dan headed south. I stayed up there, and he'd come back in the summer times. One of his trips back up in 73, we were driving down the road in my Firebird, and Dan spotted these two girls that he knew going the other direction. Said, "Turn around, go chase them." So I did. One of them ended up becoming my wife. Dan was the groomsman at my wedding. And if you look at the pictures in the wedding, we all wore white jackets. Dan had taken me out the night before the wedding on my bachelor party. I had to drive him home. Ran into his trailer. I had a trailer just a couple down I'd bought. And, but if you look at the pictures of the wedding, we were wearing white jackets. Dan was whiter than the jacket. Then in '75, we took a trip. He was back up, ended up in Fairbanks for Christmas time. We decided we're going to take a trip skiing in Jackson Hole. We're going to drive out with my brother-in-law. My wife was going to fly out and meet us there. Dan and Kenneth and I drove down to Haines to catch the ferry. While going over Chilkat Pass, dropping into Haines, this was in January, there was a snowstorm. I'm driving and I could not even see the road, nothing in front of the car. Dan put on a parka, jumped on the hood of the car, put on his ski goggles, and sat there and told me which way to turn. I could go on forever with some of these stories. I won't do that. He showed up in Anchorage. I'd moved to Anchorage by then. He showed up in Anchorage with this lady. And there was a group of us that were all friends, used to go out. Well, we decided we got to test her out and see if she's going to fit in. So we had, when he got there with her, we had dinner at McDonald's.
It was Elaine's birthday.
It was Elaine's birthday. And we went to McDonald's, McDonald Land, played there. We had a great time, and I don't know, where'd we go after McDonald's? Yeah, Lamech, somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stories I could tell. I guess I could go on and on. Whipped cream fights at the houses.
Yeah, we had to buy a can of whipped cream for everybody.
Just to,
Not
yeah,
to have the fight.
so yeah, to make it even. I'm gonna miss him. We had trips to Napa. We had ski trips. It's when Sean was about to be born, April Fools, Mary Ellen got in on this. They had already went through planning at the hospital. When Mary Ellen ended up going in to deliver, Dan knew where to go, show up at the hospital, come in the door and turn right and run down the hall to the maternity ward. Well, she and I worked out an April Fool's joke. She had one of the girls at the work called Dan, said, Mary Ellen's on the way to the hospital to deliver. Group of us got there. We went down the hallway to the left. Dan come running in, headed turn to the right. We all hollered April Fools, and he just stopped, turned around, and there we are. We made him buy us lunch. Like I say, there's a lot more. But 50 years, a long time.
All right, next, Gordon, if you don't mind.
Can you hear me okay, Sean?
Yep, just fine.
Awesome.
Good afternoon. My name is Gordon McNair, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my thoughts about Dan and to discuss the impact that Dan had on me and many other people. The first time that I met Dan was at an IRWA conference in the mid-1990s. A few years later, at another IRWA conference, Dan and Don Marks convinced me to run for the International Executive Committee of the IRWA, which I did. And boy, I had no idea what I was going to be in for. However, there was some good news. I found out while I was serving in my first year that Dan had decided he was going to run for the International Executive Committee, and I was ecstatic, to say the least, as I knew that he would be an excellent addition to our team. And I wasn't disappointed. The more I got to know Dan, the more I learned about his passion for the International Right-of-Way Association, and in particular, his passion for education. Furthermore, he was an incredible team member for our committee, as he was always level-headed and he approached things with an open mind, no matter how controversial. As it turned out, Dan and I served 5 years together on the International Executive Committee. And when I went out as the international president in 2005, Dan moved up as our new president. Even though I was a year ahead of Dan on the IEC, I often considered him to be my mentor because of his intellect, his compassion, and the way his mind worked were absolutely amazing. When I think of Dan, the mentor, it's incredible to think about how many people he's mentored within the association, and the many of them have become leaders, such as Pat Thayer, Faith Rowland, Leslie Finnegan, Cindy Welpley, just to name a few. Dan is what I refer to as a visioneer when it came to our association. His knowledge and understanding of strategic planning was spectacular. It was this expertise in his understanding of strategic planning that assisted in taking our association to a whole new level. Speaking of passion, Dan was extremely passionate about his family, as we'd often hear him tell stories about Mary Ellen, Sean, and Aaron. As well, quite often, his whole family would join him at the international conferences each year. With respect to his family, I can remember when Dan and Mary Ellen decided to take Sean and Aaron out of school in Alaska for a year. The idea was that they would travel around the lower 48 and Dan and Mary Ellen would homeschool their children. Dan mentioned to me that it was important for he and Mary Ellen to do this, as they wanted their children to be able to experience the rest of America and to learn what it was all about. Dan cited the example of wanting his kids to hear crickets at night, since they would never experience that up north. Getting back to the IRWA, Dan played an integral role in implementing the strategic plan of the International Right-of-Way Association. His forward thinking was second to none. As an example, Dan believed that we needed to develop courses to train right-of-way professionals in the skills in becoming supervisors and leaders, whereas our programs at the time were more geared for entry-level or journey-level professionals. As a result, new courses were developed to reflect this thinking, along with others, and we now have courses for all levels of right-of-way professionals. Even as recent as within the last year, Dan continued with this journey as he developed a course on project management that he delivered for Region 7. In that vein, some of us are working with headquarters staff, our IPAC committee, and others to see if we can incorporate Dan's project management course or its equivalent into the IRWA course curriculum. This is a legacy that we want to see happen for Dan and his family. Dan also had a personal goal, which we refer to as BHAG. That stood for a big, hairy, audacious goal, which was for the IRWA to become the global center for the Right-of-Way Association. This was an actual quote from Dan back in 2005. Well, Dan, my friend, we are there today as we now have international affiliations and partnerships with Mexico, Australia, South Africa, Nigeria, the UK, Japan, and Germany. So Dan, your BHAG has been realized. Some of you may not know this, but Dan loved napkins. I can remember when we'd show up for the second day of our IEC meetings, and Dan would haul out a napkin with all his notes. I'd be sitting there laughing to myself, knowing that he was out the night before with his good friend Howard Armstrong, and obviously they had done some brainstorming together, which we're going to hear about shortly. All joking aside, typically the ideas on a napkin were amazing, and this is where some of the ideas came from for our strategic plan at the time. I know, I'm telling stories out of school, but I can tell you people such as Don Marks, Jim Finnegan, and Jim Struble can attest to this. Many of you also know that Dan excelled in impromptu speaking. The one memory that I have in this regard goes back to June 2005 in Toronto, as Dan and I were sitting together at the head table for the international conference. Dan was getting ready to deliver his speech as our incoming international president, but he was busy writing on a napkin. I leaned over and I asked him, "What are you doing?" He responded by saying that he was writing out his presidential speech, which he delivered shortly thereafter. As usual, his presentation was impeccable. Dan was always on the forefront of our education program. The last time I spoke with Dan was last summer, as we were both on a training session with the International Right-of-Way Association's headquarters staff to discuss rolling out our new virtual education training platform called Neuro for our members. And guess who was the first instructor to roll out this new platform? Dan Beardsley. When I pause and think about Dan, I think of his friendly smile with that infectious laugh. And I also see him wearing short sleeve shirts, no matter how cold the weather was. In closing, Dan was an incredibly special person who inspired many of us and who made a huge impact on our lives. And we're all better people because of it, which is his amazing legacy. Dan, my friend, you will be missed, and I hope that you and Howard are up there developing all kinds of ideas on your napkins. Until later. Thank you.
Now that I've been encouraged to talk, my name is Don Marks. I'm one of the people that serve the International Right-of-Way Association on the executive committee. I've known Dan for 34 years, both as a professional and as a friend. Dan Gord pretty well. Oh, by the way, that was his wife sitting next to him, Penny, wasn't the piano player. But friendship, and that was very important to him. And he always made you, well, Sean said it right, and I'm one of his friends that I guarantee you I would certainly give him this shirt off of my back. But a couple examples, and I heard this from another right-of-way person, is just that the humanity in them. They were flying back from Anchorage, or from Seattle to Anchorage, and Steve Planchon what he was doing, he was studying for his SRWA test, which is pretty comprehensive. Dan was up in first class, Steve was back in steerage. Dan came up, gave up his seat in first class and sat with him for 2.5, almost 3 hours, and helped him brief him and study for the test, which he passed. Now that's real special. That's above and beyond the call of duty. And perceptive, he was very perceptive. He could look at any problem, dodge and stuff like this, and he could explain it back to you. There's a personal perception story. When we lost our daughter, Dan flew down to Wisconsin for the funeral. And when we were at the wake, and I always have the boards and stuff like this, and he had to wait all the way through. And so he looked at the pictures, came up, gave us condolences, and afterwards he came to us and said how special that was, those boards. He said that looking at all the places and experiences that she had, you guys can't have any regrets. And at that time, I can't even begin to tell you how much that meant to us, for somebody to say that. And so, just in closing, I'd like to say that, Dan's, passing certainly has given us 1,000 reasons to cry. But I'm going to ask you all to remember the million reasons he gave us to smile. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Nick and Margot, you guys are up next.
examples, and I heard this from another right-of-way person, is just that the humanity in them. They were flying back from Seattle, and Steve French was studying for his necessary declaration, which is pretty common. Dan was
Hopefully they'll be joining us again if somebody else would like to speak in the meantime.
There's no obligation.
No obligation, that's right. Except for Doug, he had to speak.
Yeah.
Probably won't make it very far, but there's definitely a lot of reasons to say that he was one of the best dads. When he found out what other people were passionate about, he took it upon himself to learn as much as he could about whatever. Like everybody said, education was very important to him, and it didn't matter whether he found it interesting or not. If he knew that you were interested in it, he wanted to learn. For example, when I was in school, I started playing volleyball. I got really interested in it, and here was a man sitting around with a whole bunch of other teenage girls learning how to ref volleyball so that he could have a better understanding that when he decided he wanted to yell at a ref, he at least knew what he was talking about. That's just one of the things that'll always stick with me about how he wanted to learn as much as he could, and he wanted to impart the importance of knowledge to everybody around him. And he always wanted to be there, and I know he traveled a lot with us and for work, but he always made it a point that we knew he was with us, whether he was in person or not. And I couldn't have asked for a better dad and a great example, even though my husband is quite a bit different than my dad at heart. I definitely was looking for somebody that imparted the same feelings and comfort and would just always be there to listen. So I had a great example of a dad growing up, and I remember one time him coming back after having dinner with Sean. They had gone to dinner at like a Benihana's or something where there's an open table, and they were talking with these three women who were just bashing on husbands or ex-husbands and all had been divorced. And the reason that the one thing he could find is none of them had a good father figure. That is something that I am so thankful that I had. And he will be deeply, deeply missed, but I can think of a million different reasons, like Don said, to not miss him or to smile about what he imparted with us. And I can even think from Alyeska to Zion, he showed us as much as he could about everything. So whether it was in Alaska, the lower 48, overseas, he just wanted to show us and be a part of everything that he could and take it all in while he could. So that's something that I will miss about him, and just always wanting to do something new. And we're pretty excited that he has left a legacy for us back home at the lake, that every time we go out there, we'll be a part of him. So it's pretty special.
I resent the invite to them.
Okay. We got Kleenexes handy, I know, but the impact that Dan had on everybody, most of us are not even going to truly comprehend until a year later, a year from now. Dan and Mary Ellen and Sean and Aaron, you know, they have been in my life, my God, a long time, mid-80s. Before I had children, they were in my life, and Dan took me under his arm, and he knew what my skills were and helped me build on those, encouraged me to be an instructor, which I went fighting and kicking all the way. But I did it, and I am where I am today because of his love and his kindness and his vision that he saw of pushing me and having me to challenge myself and to do more. And I have to say, though, I am proud of the one story that I did get Dan when he least expected it. And that was when we were doing the 97 seminar. And as most people knew, there was polar bears involved, and there was a lot of different things that we sold. We sold raffle tickets, and that's part of where the Parkies came from. Is we did a lot of the Mary Ellen had a great connection, and we did summer parkas and everything. And one day we needed to raise a lot of money to have the conference in Anchorage for the first time in '97. And so Dan was like, okay, well, if you can sell this number of raffle tickets, we'll go ahead and I'll buy a great bottle of champagne. He's like, okay. Well, first of all, he was surprised that I had come back and had sold all the tickets he'd previously given me. And I said, okay. And Dan just kind of looked at me like, all right. And he gave me this big stack. And a couple hours later, I think it was, I came back and I said, okay, what do I get if I sell the same amount again? And he goes, you sold all those? And I'm emptying my pockets out and giving him all the money and everything. I said, yeah. And he says, well, if you sell the same amount, he goes, I'll go ahead and throw in dinner at the Double Muskie. Okay. So I went back out, got everything sold, came back a couple hours later, and I said, so what if I sold all of those tickets and maybe sold the same amount again? Then what do I get? He goes, there is no way you sold all those tickets. I said, well, what if I did? He said, if you sold all those tickets and you can sell the same amount again, he goes, I'll throw in a limo. Okay. Gives me more tickets after I empty my pockets. And he's like, what the heck is going on here? I sold all those, came back, and Dan just looked at me. And of course, then the past presidents and the current presidents and others came with me. So what I had done is I had gone to all of the past presidents of the association, and I said, hey, you guys want to get one up on Dan? They go, yeah, how do we do that? Give me your wallets. So they bought all the tickets. So I ended up getting, well, it wasn't just me, it was also the entire family, plus from Connie Williford was there. The kids got taken back to, the babysitter got taken back to her house in a limo. There was more than one bottle of champagne, and Dan said it took him about 6 months to pay off that credit card.
Limo, ride down to Double Muskie, which is an hour away. Food, wine. Yeah. I think we lost him.
It's a little bit. I'm Cody. I'm Dan's son-in-law, and I have never met a person that was as generous as that man. I always thought that I had a lot of great role models to go with my siblings and just some really great family and friends, but Dan was a cut above, in a lot of ways. And I still remember the first time I met him. Walked in the house, Aaron invited me in, we went upstairs, and Mary Ellen and Dan were eating double muskie leftovers, actually. And I was wearing steel-toe boots, double knee Carhartts, a flannel shirt. My beard was like 4 times bigger than it is right now. And Mary Ellen got up and gave me a hug. And Dan slowly got to his feet, looked me up and down, and goes, "How are you?" And having a daughter of our own, and knowing that how pretty she's going to be growing up, I could fully understand the emotions he was going through at that moment, at this point in my life. And I'm happy we got a big old lug to take care of that. But that was just one of many. You get a feel for a person right away, and that was pretty awesome for me to know that I had my work cut out for me, and he gladly informed me that I had my work cut out for me. One night when we were down in Tempe, and it was shortly before he got 6 sheets to the wind, I believe he called it. He was keeping up with me and Sean, and we were having a great time. Sat down for dinner. Oh yeah, it was a good time. It was a very, very, very fun weekend. I came down from the slope just in time to get there, and it was awesome. But yeah, he leaned over and said those words. Said, "You've come a long ways, but you sure got a long ways to go."
And then he threw up in the toilet like 6 times.
Yeah, but I was gonna hold that part out. Love you. Appreciate that. One time Aaron and I were at our duplex that Dan and Mary Ellen bought for us, and then we built it out and did the rest of it, and then we became partners in it. And we were staying in one side, just one token of both of their ability to help out whenever they can. It's pretty amazing. But Aaron and I were on a ranger ride, and we came back to several voicemails, and turns out Doug was up, and they had a good time. And the voicemail was something along the lines of, "Well, you didn't answer, so you better be making my grandbaby." No, we weren't even married yet. Not quite. Not quite. But I don't know. When I asked for Aaron's hand in marriage, he knew exactly why I was there. He gave him a call as I was driving in Anchorage, and he picked up. I asked if he had a minute to meet. He said absolutely. I walked in to Dryden LaRue, and he brought me into the conference room, sat down, and one of the few times in my life that I was at a loss for words. This is another one of those few times, but sat down and couldn't really get the words out, and he goes, "Go ahead." And we spoke, and everything worked out pretty damn awesomely for me. She got the short end of the stick, though. But he was an amazing man, and there's just not enough good things to say about him. No matter what the situation was, he always tried to figure out a way to help, and no matter what. He didn't matter what it cost him, he always found a way to help, and it was incredible to be around that kind of person for the 10 years of my life that I was around him.
All right, looks like we have Nick and Margot back. All right, Nick and Margot, if you guys can make sure that your YouTube is off, and then go ahead and share with us, please. Oh, still muted.
a good time. And what was conference room, sat down, and one of the few times in my life that I was at a loss for words. This is another one of those few times. But sat down and couldn't really get the words out. He goes, "Go ahead." And we spoke, and everything worked out pretty damn awesomely for me. She got the short end of the stick, though. But he was an amazing man, and there's just not enough good things to say about him. No matter what the situation was, he always tried to figure out a way to help, no matter what. It didn't matter what it cost him, he always found a way to help. And it was incredible to be around that kind of person for the 10 years of my life.
Hello?
Sat down, and one of the few times in my life. This is another one of those few times. Sat down, couldn't really get the words out. And we spoke, and everything worked out pretty damn awesomely for me. She got short on the stick, but he was an amazing man, and there's just not enough good things to say about him. No matter what the situation was, he always tried to figure out a way to help. Didn't matter what it cost him.
All right, you guys, can you hear me now? Through the Zoom?
Can hear you, Sean.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, go ahead and share. If you can turn on.
Turn off our YouTube. You have to tell.
How do we do that?
Very good at this. Okay,
Okay.
wait a minute. Sorry. Well, Mickey, I don't know how to do it here. See,
Can you guys hear us? Okay. I don't know whether we're on the screen or not. You're not missing anything by not seeing me, but I hope you can hear us because I've prepared about half an hour worth of comments. I'd also like to say at this point that we are not part of the Right-of-Way Association.
Hello?
It was sometime in 1977 that Margot and I first met Dan.
He and I got along and decided that we would become real estate barons, even though we knew nothing about building or, for that matter, real estate. We bought 2 city lots with houses on them for $40,000 and declared ourselves Low Down Enterprises, which was our name and our business philosophy. I'm not saying that the properties were in bad shape, but there was a 14-inch drop between the kitchen and the living room. Dan and I spent every waking moment for 2 years rehabbing the windows, doors, plumbing, roof, and the foundation. We spent roughly $30,000 in materials, and after paying ourselves 2 cents an hour, we ended up selling the property for 10 grand less than we had paid for it. The late 70s in Alaska was the high point of the Alaska pipeline construction, and the streets were paved with gold. Everyone was from somewhere else, and when you made one friend, then all of their friends became your friends. We were young, 2,500 miles away from the nearest supervision.
Turn off our YouTube.
And
you have to tell.
And surrounded by.
Are you talking to us? Somebody's saying turn off the YouTube, but I don't know what that means.
Okay. I remember one Halloween when I was dressed in the Pope and spent the evening.
Wait a minute. Sorry. Oh, Mickey, I don't know how.
Can you guys hear us? We can hear you.
Okay.
I don't know whether we're on the screen or not. You're not missing anything by not seeing me, but I hope you can hear us because I've prepared about half an hour worth of content. Yes. I don't. Is that? We have both a phone and a
computer, because we could. Which should we turn off, the computer or the TV?
Houses on them for $40,000 and declared ourselves. Which one is our YouTube? I'm not saying the properties were in bad.
Did we screw it up again?
14-inch living room. Dan and I spent every waking moment for 2 years rehabbing the windows, doors, we spent roughly $30,000 in material. I think that's gone. I don't think. Okay. Okay.
Do you want to start?
I remember one Halloween when I was dressed as the Pope and spent the evening blessing cocktail crackers. Sally Cruising came dressed as a nun in a costume that was a little too realistic. Everyone wanted to know who had invited the nun and did we have to watch our language. About 10 p.m., someone noticed that the front porch seemed to be on fire. We all stomped out to find Daniel dressed in full Ku Klux Klan regalia, burning a cross on the front lawn. His comment was, "That's what you get for starting a party without me." The joke later proved to be on Dan because the people in the next house were Black and hadn't realized that we were having a party. Dan was a party waiting to happen, and then he took off to attend law school at Gonzaga in Spokane. He took his parting ways with him, and there he met the love of his life, a blonde fellow law student named Mary Ellen. And the rest of that story you probably know, as they say, was history. I'll miss Dan. He was a larger-than-life character, full of great fun with a twinkle in his eye. The world will be a less interesting place without Dan, and we are all poorer for his absence, but richer for having known him. I'll close with a quote from one of Dan's friends and mentor, Don Bruce. Don would have said of Dan, he was a true friend, he drank good whiskey, and always carried a credit card. Dan, if you were up there looking down on us, have a drink in our honor until we can all meet again for that great party in the sky. And this is the last picture we have of Dan.
I think you showed to this one, but I can't see. That's a good picture of Dan.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys.
Are we hearing the scene on?
So I'm Tony Barter. I'm fortunate I was a co-worker and a friend of Dan throughout the years, probably 25 plus years now. And that's manifested into probably a better relationship here because Dan shared himself amongst everybody. And I mean, not to be real redundant, but the thing I found about Dan was he was very solution oriented, and I could consult with him both professionally and personally, which I did on many occasions, and he could walk me through the process of finding the right answer. And he kind of reminds me of the old Dale Carnegie, you know, they don't care how much you know, they want to know that you care. And he brought that to every situation. In his right-of-way acquisitions, he could work through the technical things, but at the end of the day, he showed the client that he cared about what he was doing. And generally, it just came down to how much was it going to cost. And he'd leave that to some judge someplace to settle out. But they never felt any animosity amongst each other. He was doing his job. He had a reason to be there. And he shared that with them in a way that they were very compassionate to the solution that was coming out of that. And I can't say enough about how we enjoyed him. And I think Sean did a good job of capturing the man that we all know. And thank you.
Okay, I'll make this quick. I'm married to Tony, and we have known Dan and Mary Ellen a long time, 25, 30 years. Anyway, I loved him, and I will miss him. But, we're all talking about how great he was, and he was. He was great. He had a wicked sense of humor. He was a nasty bridge player. And when we would get together with our bridge group back in Anchorage, he and I inevitably were partners. And he had this twinkle in his eye all the time about wanting to win, and he was very competitive. I'm very competitive, so when we played against each other, he took special delight, in setting me, and I would particularly take delight in setting him, and that was really fun. But there were lots of long conversations like all of you are talking about. We talked about Sean when Sean was in high school and the English class that he had, and the teacher he had, and about writing essays, and we talked about Aaron and volleyball and college, and I was an educator, so we kind of picked each other's brains about how we felt about things. And I just feel like, he is here, but this is the kind of event he would have loved. He just would enjoy seeing all of you and being part of this and toasting all of you. And this is, it's strange him not being here with us. So anyway, loved Mary Ellen and Aaron and Sean and Cody, but gosh, he was a good guy, right? We all loved him, so that's
If there's anybody else who would like to speak, you'll still be able to. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit about Dad. It's So Dad was born on March 14th, March 14th in 1952. He was born in Champlain, Illinois, as a little itty bitty baby, like very tiny baby. Very fortunate to be a beneficiary of modern medicine and the miracle that is modern medicine. If you ever seen his birth certificate, his feet are about that big. You know, you think about it in 1952, like that's pretty incredible. And 2 pounds. And you know, he got a lot of his fighting spirit from his mother. Apparently she posted up on a 6'8" NBA basketball player whose son was also in the same incubator at the same time. And when he said look how little they are, and this tiny little woman, you know, said, how big are they, you know? But yeah, so Dad, a lot of people don't know, but he had an aggressive streak to him. Doug probably knew it a little bit more than many. But he carried that as passion for everything that he did. As Aaron said, he was passionate about other people. So after you know, living in Florida and Pennsylvania, he moved to Fairbanks, Alaska in June of 1970. I believe he followed Brad, if I'm correct. Is that right? Yeah, he followed his stepfather Brad to go to the Black Gold Rush that was about to happen in Alaska, and ended up walking, if not the whole thing, most of the Alaska pipeline before it was ever built. Snowshoeing at a mile an hour to go meet old Chilcoots who knew more about mechanical engineering than they did English, and probably didn't really care to know anything about this young comeuppance who happened to be on their doorstep in the middle of nowhere. But Dad, he talked about it all the time. He enjoyed it thoroughly. It was a major point in his life, and something that grew him into the negotiator that he would become. Because I can imagine if you can negotiate with a Chilcoot, yeah, you can probably negotiate with anybody. You know, you can also count all the teeth. He probably saw a full set of teeth in the entirety of the Alaska pipeline, you know, and a lot of booze, I'm sure. Yeah, so he attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks. In 1977, graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Science degree in real estate. And Mr. Glover, I have heard some stories about Florida that I did not know until I was in college. So as 22 years old, Dad started telling me stories about what he and Pete Glover got down to, and all I could think of was, shame on me for not knowing. Yeah, that's right. Well, they probably never should have told me. I can't erase the memories of what he told me, and I have a very vivid imagination, and he has a very vivid way of describing things. So, yeah. No, it was interesting to hear things about that. Like, I didn't find out that Mom and Dad smoked pot until I was 22 years old. And coming up in our family, that was quite the surprise. Yeah, and you know, just everything I thought, and I didn't realize how much more there was to my father, how much more there was to my parents. And, you know, I just thought they were just mean. No, like, there's just nothing but love. So he graduated from 1977 University of Florida with Bachelor in Science degree in real estate. He later attended and graduated from Gonzaga University of Law with the Juris Doctor in 1982. During that time, he met my mother, and I'm very thankful for that. Thankful for you. He began his career in right-of-way and land consultant field in the early 1970s, where he excelled for more than 40 years. During this time, he was actively involved in too many projects to mention, but one of truly memorable ones is his involvement in negotiating and purchasing property for private landowners for the Alyeska pipeline. He even drove the first private vehicle up the Hull Road and hiked or snowshoed most of the pipeline looking for property corners. He was actively involved in International Right-of-Way Association. He was on numerous IRWA committees, was also a very popular instructor for many IRWA courses. In 2000, he began his tenure on the International Executive Committee, which culminated with becoming international president in 2005. And sorry. One of the most proud moments of my life was placing the flag in uniform on Father's Day, the day before he accepted the position of president of the International Right-of-Way Association. And I know it meant a lot to him. It meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to everybody that was here. I was truly, like, when I think of Dad, I think of a truly gracious and sublime individual who cared for so many. So if there's anybody else that would like to speak, you feel free to do so. If not, we'll go ahead and start winding down here in just a minute.
Is it okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Sean, for mentioning my name. My name's Pete Glover, and I want to defend us because we really didn't do that. Many horrible things. I met Dan in '76. There's a year missing there. We both graduated in '76, I think. But at University of Florida, we were in a business fraternity together, which was just a guys for a drinking club. So we spent a lot of time traveling to Atlanta and different places as pre-employment opportunities, but really they were just fun trips and a great place to go. Dan, after we finished college, went back to Fairbanks, and he called me a few minutes later, and he says, "Pete, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm back in my hometown of Daytona Beach, and I'm selling typewriter ribbons with my college degree." And he said, "Are you having fun?" And I said, "Well, it could be better, but it's not bad." And he goes, "Well, why don't you come to Alaska?" Now, my grandfather had just passed away, and he left me just enough money to buy an airline ticket from Daytona Beach up to Kennedy to Fairbanks, and he said, we'll work our way around the world. So I bought a ticket, went to Honolulu and Auckland, New Zealand, and Santiago, Chile, and back to Miami, just in case we didn't make it to Asia. And he says, "I know people everywhere. I'll get us jobs. We'll have a great time. We're single. We got the world by the tail. College is done." I said, "Okay, I'm coming." So showed up in Fairbanks in May of '77 and created a 3-month or 4-month memory that I'll carry with me forever. A great one. But Dan kept, we were living together, and I was planning to stay there. Claudia made the summer great, and meeting Doug at the wedding in Spokane a few years later was a tremendous thing, and going on the pack trip was a great memory. But he always reached out, and he always kept connecting, and he brought Sean, brought the family down to Florida in an RV, and we saw a space shuttle go up at night down at Kennedy, and Aaron and Alex, our younger son, were the same age, so they had a lot in common. No matter what, every couple of years we'd connect. They'd come visit in Florida, spend time together. I think after hearing all of these stories, I think the one thing that we can all agree, whether you knew Dan in the early years or in the Right-of-Way Association or in times in between, is that Dan made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. And for that, I think we're all thankful for the friendship with Dan and getting to know his family and friends through the years. And we miss you, Dan. And thank you for all the memories. Thank you for the great times. But most of all, thank you for your honest, heartfelt friendship through the years. We love you, buddy.
I had to wait till Cody and Aaron and everybody was done because I couldn't follow them. But I can follow them. So we met Dan when Tom was in law school in the late 70s, and the three of them were in law school together, and I was the whatever spouse that just kind of hung around with the three. But we had a monthly, weekly dinner party that we would take turns, and we all had to make something different that we'd never made before, and we had some great ones and some spectacular failures. And then one night it was Valentine's Day weekend, and so Dan and I decided to make chocolate-covered strawberries. And I worked at the hospital, so I brought home a syringe, and we filled those with Grand Marnier. They probably had an ounce or more in each strawberry. Needless to say, it was the start of many drunken evenings, but lots of fun too. Then we went on the horseback trip, and we were touring the Yellowstone before the trip started. And we hear out the window, we're kind of looking at the river and this beautiful scenery, and we hear this, "Help, help, help, my son's drowning, he's in the river, he's drowning, I can't get him." And so everybody piles out of the van, and Tom's a national swimmer, Pete's been a ocean lifeguard, and they're running down the hill as fast as they can. And who passes them? Dan. He can't swim. So he gets down to the water and all of a sudden realizes he's not the one that's going in the water. And Dan and Pete, Tom and Pete pulled this poor boy out, and the family was very thankful. And, you know, he made us all part of the family, because when graduation came around, Tom took a job in Wisconsin 2 weeks before graduation. And so that was hard, but he gave me one of his family's tickets, and so that I could go. And so here was another date. He just brought you in and made you part of your family. And as Aaron said, if you were passionate about something, he wanted to know. One of our girls was a good swimmer, so he was, after a good swim meet, he was one of the first emails I'd get the next morning about how well she'd done. So that was always pretty special. But I know he's still here because recently the last meal I served him was French toast. And I feel bad about that. I wish it was something now that had been something more exciting. But it was good. And so we planned this trip in the motorhome. And so when things happened, we decided, well, we're going to take it anyway. We're going to go around Arizona and take this trip. So one of the spots was this Indian place. It was a crater, the Sunset volcano crater, and an Indian reservation with some prehistoric ruins. And so Mary Ellen had made us all a week drink. Ha ha, you all know that. And so in true form, Dan was messing with us, and I was like, oh, so we're going to go to Wapatootie. Mary Ellen's going, no, that's the name of it. And I go, no, then Wapasiki? Wapatazuki. And I was making up all these crazy names, and we're laughing hysterically. And so we drive into the park, and the Sunset Crater is there, and we're looking at it. And Tom goes in and talks to the ranger, and they're talking about climbing the Sunset Crater and everything. And so he turns to the man, and this man has a twinkle in his eye, and Tom says, now, what is the correct pronunciation? And the man with his twinkle in the eye was like, Dan was there messing with us one more time, looked at Tom and said, sunset. So I know he's still here. He's still laughing at all of us, and I know all of us are sad, and we've all got these great memories. But he's not gone. He's there, and he's going to mess with each one of us as time goes on.
Well, I'm Tom, Jonna's husband, and Dan and I were in law school together. That's where I first met him. We were in a study group because the first year it's hopeless. You can't understand everything, and so you get together with about 4 people and you quiz each other and so on. Dan had this irritating habit of knowing 100% of all of the basic rules for everything. He could rattle them off like a machine gun. And we would sit around and look and realize that we needed to study some more. He particularly loved property, and he got to know his property professor well, and they exchanged letters and notes and things literally for decades. But he really got a number of you have talked about real estate and so on, but he really got the law. Now, in my career, I had to work with a lot of lawyers, and I had lawyers who allegedly worked for us. And the thing that you found out is there's 2 kinds of lawyers. There's lawyers who think it's their job to tell you why you can't do something. And then there's lawyers who tell you how you can get something done. And Dan was one of those. Despite this machine gun memory of all the points of law and so on, the things you had to do, the thing that made him distinctive, and the reason he could do the deals he did and build the relationships he had, was because he always wanted to get it done. And he would look at what the rules were, and then he would figure out the way to get it done. I also think when someone dies much too young, it always makes us take a deep breath and ponder and reflect. And one of the things that I think about is we all have phases in our lives. We're young and we're educated. And then we fall in love and get married, and we have higher education, and we have children, and we're focused on our children. And then we move on to careers. And then we move on to retirement, etc. The interesting thing about Dan is that there is something that is woven through his life history, which is this sense of reaching out and engaging with others. I mean, how many people decide to have a honeymoon and invite the entire wedding party to ride horses 10,000 feet in the air in the Grand Tetons? And his dad. And his dad. But he did that. He came from modest family background with financial challenges. He made it through grit and apparently for some really poor real estate. He survived some really poor real estate investments, but he still made it. And yet he had this sense about him that he encompassed. Now, we really enjoyed when he was one of the leaders in the distance education movement and put his children in a motorhome, and he visited us as well in Wisconsin. It broke down in Wisconsin. He had to get a new, Las Vegas. He had to get a new transmission. So they stayed a little bit longer, and no child should go to college without having been educated in Las Vegas. So you did get to see the bright lights of the city. On Halloween, because as we know, it's only the tourists who misbehave. I want you to know that. Dan was really a special guy. He graduated from unsuccessful cooking with Jana and me to being able to barbecue quite a bit. He loved Alaska game. He loved Alaska fish. It makes me glad that this is here because Dan would feel this was an appropriate symbol of his Alaska heritage. He was really a great guy. And the last thing I want to say is, as we would talk the last 10 years or so, as the phases of his life, he had moved into sort of, I think, the senior statesman role. He would talk about the projects in Alaska. He would talk about maybe some really goofed up real estate where someone who didn't know their job had made a mess of the title, and he was working his way through it. And he believed it was education that had to do that. And he was so committed to raising the quality, not just of his own work, which he always had a high standard for, but raising the standards of a profession. And that's when you begin to build a legacy. We all build a legacy with our family and our children and our grandchildren, but you build legacies in your career. And he was doing that as well. And he was just as dedicated about it as he could be. In the last year, a couple of you from IRWA have already spoken about his desire to add additional material to the curriculum of the association. And I, at that time, was running a TV station that was doing education, and we had pivoted and were trying to do distance education for high school kids to try to teach teachers how to do it right. Dan and I spent hours talking about how you would do distance education. How could the association do that? How could he take his curriculum and make it work technologically? How could he have the caliber of interaction that was necessary to make it the same kind of meaningful experiences that the seminars had made? He never wanted to stop learning, and he wanted to put that learning to work to accomplish something. That's the legacy of a man. Your children and the character of your children are a legacy of the man. And we all respect him deeply because of who he was and what he did, and how, whether it was his honeymoon where he included everyone, or it was IRWA where he tried to include education for everyone, or he did all these other things. Dan had a character through his life that morphed as he went through each of the phases. And it was powerful and it was meaningful, and we all love him because of it. So we celebrate his life today, and we're saddened that we've lost him. Well, my name is Jim Brinker. I didn't know Dan as long as some of you, but we did know him before some of you. I went to Gonzaga to law school, although I didn't happen to party with their group. But at any rate, Dan was, I don't want to repeat too much here, but was a delightful guy, a very bright guy, and a very human. As is evidenced by what people have said, his relationships with people, even if it was a business relationship, it was still a personal relationship. And it worked out well for us because, contrary to what some of the rest of the family thinks, we were Beardsleys before they were. Because we lived with the Beardsleys, and over time we were camp followers. We would follow the IRWA annual meetings all over the place, and even shared the suite for the incoming president in Toronto. So it was very warm and friendly. Dan also didn't just do his right-of-way job and that kind of thing. Mary Ellen and can't think of your name. What? Tony. And I and Dan, we all were on the board of directors of the Hilltop Ski Area from time to time. And when I inherited the job of treasurer, I got it from Dan. And here came the spreadsheets. You know, he had that down to how much the different activities and all that were, and we were all part of the community and that aspect of things. And so I'll just say I've worked with Dan, worked for Dan, and it's always been a wonderful experience. And to get to his competitive nature, I'll tell you about one little incident that sort of tells the tale. We were hired, Dan was, his firm, Dryden and LaRue, was hired to get a fiber optic cable from Wasilla to Fairbanks. And that you had to go through Denali National Park. Now, in Alaska, it was sort of weird. If you wanted to go there and it was state land and law you had to deal with, you could go in with a chainsaw and take clear a quarter-mile wide. As long as nobody could see it from the road, they didn't care how many trees you cut down. But the feds was a different story. And I'll kindly say the tree huggers who were in charge did not even allow DOT to mow the greater ditches through Denali. This was au naturel. Well, it turns out that the Matanuska Telephone Association had spent something in excess of $100,000 trying to get a telephone line in there. And the best they could do, after spending all that money, was to get about a mile of cable by sawing a groove in the asphalt along the edge of the road and then filling it with butyl rubber or whatever on top of it. That was as good as they could do. And then we got this job to get this fiber optic through there to complete the loop for the security of Alaska and the United States. And Dan, you know, just sort of had that glint in his eye, and he was devious at times. And he said, "We can do it, we can do it." And so I was out on the road with a contractor, and we were talking about, are you going to put an aerial on the right side of the road? You're going to bury it on the left side? What's it going to cost, you know, to run it under the road, bore through, all this kind of thing? And of course, we were, what should we say, conspicuous. We were out there working, and all these guys were keeping an eye on us. And it turns out that all the while, Dan is dealing with Washington, D.C. So all the meetings and all the protests and the arguments that were being made in Alaska didn't amount to anything. We got the permit, we stuck it through there, and Dan just grinned ear to ear. And that's the guy he was. And we love him, and
thank everybody who spoke. Just clear testament to who my father was. He's truly a great man. There is food, there are drinks, and there's a pool. And in Dad's honor, I think he would expect every single person to at least take a dip. So, yeah, please let's enjoy this moment, and let's enjoy being together and being my dad's friends. So, go ahead and close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time of friendship, this time of memory, and the opportunity to just celebrate a life that was so full and just taken too soon, but taken in your time, and all that we could learn from him. We believe that we've learned a lot from him, and we pray that that legacy continues through generation after generation. We ask this in your son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to Tucson Media Studio. We're very appreciative.
We will take all the plastic off the food and come and eat and drink, so. Dan would want.
I didn't put it together until you said about the coats.
Yeah.
We stayed at your house.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, there's a lot going on.
Sean, thank you very much. I'm sorry that we have a delay. It was really hard to talk, and also because I'm not.
No, I'm in.
And part of that was due to him. He brought me every goal. He helped. He stepped up there. I was about to lose some business every day. He stepped in, gave me some money, said, I don't care if I get it back or not.